Hey dudes, hope you guys are doing fine. I am Ayman and this is Adho. So my fellow nerds and geeks, today we are going to talk about the evolution of intelligence and whether it is important to be intelligent or not. So without further more, let's get to the topic. The oldest Homo sapien remains, dating back to 300,000 years, have been found at a site in Morocco. This was 3 years ago. Before that, we thought that we only go back to roughly 200,000 years, and before to 100,000 years. And even that last number was significantly enormous and terrifying to me. Because when you consider that the first civilization known to mankind has only existed 6,000 years ago, and that would be the Sumerian civilization, in case you're wondering. Now, when you put those two numbers together, you can't help but notice that less than a tenth of human existence is documented, and that's 100,000. Never mind the 300,000 years. Now let's forget about the big numbers for a while and let's talk about the 6,000 years of civilization. Because it's not like the last 2% of our history was all bright and prosperous. I mean, they knew how to build some cool things that keep us from sleeping at night. They figured out the principle of telescopes and math and philosophy and medicine and basically everything, but still we didn't engage in heavy industry until very recently. It's like yesterday compared to our history. The first car was only invented between 1885 and 1886, and it had 3 wheels, so basically it's a tricycle that didn't need pedals. And ever since, for the last 134 years, each year we have a breakthrough after the other that some game changer discoveries are overlooked by the Nobel Committee, such as the discovery of dark matter, Stephen Hawking's theory on black holes' death, and many, many more. That's just from the Industrial Revolution 260 years ago. Now remember the numbers we talked about earlier? The whole thing from 1760 that we figured out: steam power, machinery, electricity, I don't know, anything you could think of, internet, all of that we reached in only 0.086% of modern human existence. I'll say it again. كل حوايج هذوك لحقنا لهم غير في 0.086% من عمر تواجد الإنسان الحديث على وجه الأرض. I don't know about you, but that makes me really wonder why it took us that long to get to this level of intelligence. Now, in terms of evolution of intelligence, the first thing that comes to mind is the brain size, and that might be true to an extent, because as times went by, the human brain has gotten larger and larger, while the human himself has gotten smarter. But having a larger brain doesn't mean necessarily being smarter. For example, the African elephant's brain is roughly more than twice the size than the humans, and despite that, we are significantly far more superior. Another example is dolphins. In that case, the dolphins have slightly a bigger brain than humans do, and they are arguably the smartest animals, because they have a higher brain to body ratio than chimpanzees, but still lower than the humans. Now that may confirm our previous hypothesis of the brain size being responsible for the evolution of intelligence, but it does not explain why with the same brain size we achieved more in 0.1% of our existence than we achieved in 99.9% of it. That pushes us to think of something else, something that has less to do with the human's nature and more to do with the habitat he lives in. And since we are not that invulnerable against catastrophes and diseases, let's also rule those out. And that leaves us with the predatory behavior. Now, predation is when an organism called a predator kills and eats another organism called a prey. Humans are predators. For example, here in Algeria, we constantly eat chicken, cows, sheep, and the list goes on and on. So we are preying on those animals, and that make us predators. The most important characteristics and things in common between predators are the very sharp senses, such as the excellent eyesight of predatory birds, the strong hearing, the outstanding ability to smell, the speed, the sharp claws, and the very strong jaws. Some of these features, or all of them in some cases, is what helps the predators capture and kill their prey. I don't know if you figured out where I'm going with this, but pretty much most of the prey have sharper senses than us. We don't have claws, all we have is very thin nails that would easily break and start bleeding. We don't have strong jaws, we don't have any camouflage that would help us blend into nature, and we definitely cannot outrun our prey in short distances. I mean, we could outrun them in long distances, but who's going to chase his food for a marathon? Scientists believe that this lack of competence is what instigated our evolution and that made us think of other ways to compensate for it. So we figured out how to use tools. Oh, that's a rock, throw it at him. Oh, look, he's dead. Maybe we should do this more often. And we figured out how to customize these tools to our needs. So we made knives, axes, pottery, and we kept on figuring things out based on our needs. But this also wasn't the exact case, or at least it wasn't always the case. For decades, anthropologists have been finding fossil remains of early humans with cracks and breaks on them. They thought it was because of violence among the same species, and the same thing happened in 1924 when Raymond Dart discovered the first fossil ever found of Australopithecus africanus, and this fossil was named the Tongue Child. And it wasn't until 2006 that we matched the marks on the skull of the Tongue Child to the marks left by African eagles on the skulls of their prey. On that, Dr. Lee Berger wrote, "The evidence suggests that the Tongue Child was itself the victim of a bird of prey." Based on that evidence and others, scientists have concluded that early humans were in fact prey. And what pushed us to evolve wasn't the need to eat, but the need to not be eaten by others. Now, could this be the answer? Absolutely not. All of the previous theories and studies may tell us how and why we evolved, but still it does not come close to answer why it took us this long. For anything, it makes it even more confusing, because you're going to tell me that when we had to either run from our predators or run after our prey, we settled with rocks and stone, knives and axes. And when we discovered agriculture and built the civilization, suddenly we needed more than melee weapons. Now we have to kill ourselves with guns. And don't get me wrong, we may never know why certain things happened the way it did, the time it did, but we can always try to understand why. But we can always try to understand why. Maybe one day we will get an answer. Maybe it was all a part of a divine plan, and maybe intelligence is just not important, and we don't need to be smart after all. We made it through without it. In the end, we wish that things happened earlier. Maybe we could have avoided so many bad things, and maybe we would have been far more advanced by now. But you know what? Let's give ourselves some credit, shall we? Because in a world that controls creatures that lives in, we control that world. 1.5 million years ago, we controlled fire. 23,000 years ago, we discovered farming. In the past, people worshipped the sun. Now it's just one of 250 billion stars in only our galaxy. Now we are not only able to alter big things, but also microscopic things. Splitting an atom is easier than splitting a chocolate bar these days. So guys, this is the end of our episode. I hope this would give you the motivation to look furthermore in the things we talked about. Through the week, I would be posting the source material and the things we learned together in the Instagram stories. So if you have any questions, or if I said something wrong or something you disagree with, please let me know and help us. I'm still figuring things out. I know this was like kind of awkward, but that's just a part of me. I'm awkward on daily basis. So I am Ayman, and this was a vow.